Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to be discussing how to determine whether or not you're disabled. Under the rules that Social Security has established to determine whether or not somebody is actually disabled. So there's a couple of preliminary things that I think are really important at this stage. So first and foremost, a lot of times people go to their own doctor. They go to a hospital, etc., and that starts the process whether or not they're physically or mentally disabled, or the start of the process and determining whether or not they're disabled. And their doctor at a hospital, or even the hospital itself, they have people there, social workers, etc., that will tell the claimant, the person needing to file for disability, that they're actually disabled. And one of the things you need to realize from the very beginning is that Social Security, while they do take that into consideration in the overall aspect of the case, they do not go by what a doctor says, an independent physician would say in regards to being disabled. They would tell anybody that came to any employee of the Social Security Administration that works in the disability area that only Social Security can decide whether or not you're disabled. So that's a pretty important aspect to understanding whether or not you meet the criteria for being determined that you're disabled, either by a physical or a mental condition or a combination of both. But if you do have a doctor that's willing to help participate in the process, it's always good to get a letter stating what kind of restrictions you do have. That's always the best way. So instead of the doctor making a blanket statement as to, hey, Miss Smith is disabled, it would be better if the doctor said, this is what I'll do for you, Miss Smith. I'll write that you have to lie down during the day sporadically, couple times during the day, and you need to rest for an hour at a time to relieve your symptoms, that you can only walk about a block or so before having to sit down and rest. And when you do, you have to sit down and rest for 5 minutes. You have difficulty carrying anything weighing over 5 pounds. You must alternate sitting and standing throughout the day. Those are just conditions. Those are examples of limitations that you have that help Social Security determine whether or not you're disabled. Okay, so you're ready to file for disability. You have you have one or other physical or mental condition that keeps you from working, or a combination of both. And you're trying to determine whether or not you're disabled. Well, understand this. So you have to fulfill both the financial side as well as the medical side of being determined disabled in order to be determined to be disabled. So, for example, you may have a medical condition that Social Security determines that you are unable to work, but financially you haven't stopped working, or you've made too much money in an SSI purpose, or your pension is too large. It's over the 80% rule. There's or your short-term disability from the state, if you're in California, things like that interfere with receiving the maximum amount of money that you can get, or any money for that matter, under Social Security disability. Okay, so determining whether or not you're disabled, there's actually a 5-step process, and you've got to fulfill all of these steps except for step number 3 in order to be found disabled. Okay, so the first one is that you're not engaging in what Social Security determines substantial gainful activity. Now, it's a very technical term. In order to be considered engaging in substantial gainful activity, the work must be both substantial and gainful. Describing the nuances of that first step is particularly not going to be important to you. Suffice it to say, understand at step 1, are you still working? If you are still working, then there's limits on how much you can earn, both under SSDI and SSI. So at step 1, you're needing to file for disability, evaluate whether or not if you are working, you'll know if you are or not. And if the amount of gross income you have coming in each month. And you can't look at net because things such as child support, your not your beneficiaries, but the people that you support that you can put on your tax returns, things like that, members in your household. So step one, are you working? It's just that simple. And if you satisfy step one, you're not engaging in substantial gainful activity, then you get to move on to step two. If you are working and you try to apply for disability and you're making over the statutory amount, you're going to be denied with what's called a technical denial, and you're dead in the water at step one. Okay. This also goes to, for example, many of you are needing to go to a hearing, and so you're looking at 2 years of your life, and you allege an onset date of 2 years ago, and you're wanting your back pay for those 2 years. Well, if you start working while you're waiting for your hearing, which a lot of people do because they simply have no other alternative, you could be putting your Social Security claim in jeopardy. I understand as well, how are you going to survive during this process? But that is a topic for another day. So step one, substantial gainful activity. Are you working? If you're working, then evaluate if you're not to make sure you're not making over the statutory limit for that year. And again, if you are working, you're making over that amount either for SSDI or SSI purposes, then you're not going to go on to step two. So step two is determining whether or not your condition is severe. Okay, so Social Security says that in order to be severe, it's got to interfere with your daily activities, your ability to walk, stand, sit, it's got to substantially interfere with them. And if your conditions are just moderate or slight, then you're likely going to be denied at step two. Now, what happens a lot of times is people file for disability and they allege that their conditions are severe. And then Social Security comes back and they look at their medical records and they say that they don't ever call you a liar because this is a non-adversarial process. What Social Security does is they say that you're not telling the truth in a nice way, that your medical records do not support the limitations that you claim you have. Okay, it's a nice way of saying that you're not telling the truth or you're grossly over-exaggerating the truth there. So at step two, if your condition is severe, if it substantially interferes with your ability to sit and stand and walk, to lift things, climb stairs, ladders, things of that nature, or if on the mental side you're going through long periods of being depressed, there's hospitalizations, for mental issues, etc. Those are making your condition severe, okay? And so if you can pass step two, you're on to step three. Well, what step three says is, do you meet a medical listing? Now, Social Security puts together a listing for just about all the ailments there are in the world. Now, of course, the ones that are very rare, they don't have a medical listing for it. But let's say that you have ADHD, and let's hope you're not filing a claim on ADHD. It's going to be very difficult for you. But and you also have bipolar. Well, you can look in the medical listings, look there to determine whether or not a better one is AIDS, HIV positive, where it turns to AIDS, and there's a medical listing there for it, and you can read what the medical listing says for AIDS, and if you meet that criteria plus step one and step two. So step two is going to be pretty much taken care of because you're meeting a medical listing at step three, but you're also not working. You can end your case right there. You're disabled under the rules, and you're going to get 3 years of disability, and then 3 years they'll come back and review your case. Okay, step four. Let's just say that you don't satisfy step three. 95% of the people do not satisfy step three, and so like I told you, as each step, you're supposed to be able to satisfy it. Step 3 is where you get a break. You don't have to satisfy step 3. You can move on to step 4 and step 5. Well, step 4 says, can you go back and do any of the work that you've done before? Well, can you go and do your past work? Well, what happens is Social Security looks at the last 15 years of your employment, and they don't particularly care who you work for. They're more concerned about what you did in that job. If you worked in a job that created transferable work skills for you, especially for the claimants under the age of 50, and you have at least a high school education, it's very unlikely you're going to be found disabled, at least on the initial application process that's handled through Social Security and doesn't move on to the judge's office, which is ODAR, the Office of Disability Adjudication and Review. So if you're found to have transferable work skills, if you were in a management position, if you supervise people, things of that nature, and you're capable of sitting at a job for 6 out of 8 hours a day, which is called sedentary work. If you can carry some file folders here and there, things of that nature, then a lot of people will be denied at step 4, that they're capable of going back and doing some work they did 15 years ago. Social Security believing that you still have those skills that would allow an employer to take it into consideration and hire you if you're out looking for a job, okay? So at step 4, we're talking about doing past work. And what you really need to do is evaluate what you've been doing for the past 15 years. Again, nobody cares who your employer was. They care what you did specifically. So if you're a guy that's worked in a warehouse for 15 years and you've done heavy lifting, etc., and you have back issues, well, Social Security is going to say that you're not capable of returning back to past employment, but you might be able to do some other job. Okay, so that moves you on to step 5. Step 5 is, are you capable of doing some other type of work in the national economy? And the fact that there are no jobs available to you within the local economy is really not taken into consideration. We all live in the United States, and the fact that you may have to move to take another job, this type of job that would be available to you that you'd be capable of performing, is really not taken into consideration, and you don't get found disabled just because there isn't that kind of job where you live. So what step 5 does is it takes into consideration, Social Security takes into consideration your age, your education, and your work skills that you've acquired over the past 15 years. Now here is where so many people get denied, and if you're going to be denied, this is the large majority of it, because Social Security will let you go through step 1 and 4 and then deny you at 5, basically, many times. So step 5, you're under the age of 50, you did management, and you can't do any heavy lifting, things like that. You have bad knees. But you can sit for 6 out of 8 hours a day. You can take normal breaks during the day. You get an hour off for lunch. Hey, there's going to be a sedentary job out there that you're capable of performing. Now, for those that can pass step 5, you've crossed the finish line. If you've satisfied 1 and 2, you got let off the hook because you didn't meet a medical listing for 3. You can't go and do the jobs that you've done in the past at step 4. In step 5, there would be no jobs available to you in the national economy, given the restrictions that you have. So what's important is the additional jobs that you're found to have. That is taking into consideration as well of your severe restrictions that you have on walking, standing, and then the mental issues, working amongst other people, being able to work a full work week without missing days, things of that nature. So if you're found not to be disabled at step 5, then your case is really done. You'll have to appeal to ODAR and argue that there would be no jobs available to you in the national economy, given your set of restrictions. Or you have to start your process all over again. Or if you're a winner, then Social Security will pay you your back pay, and you will start getting a monthly payment for your disability, and they will review your case in most times 3 years to see if you're still disabled. Thank you.